This is TWiT.
Well, folks, it's now time for the news bites, and we have a couple good ones this week. Becoming a cybersecurity professional requires more than class education. Like the normal classical education is not going to help you here. Now, many of you might argue that's not true, but what is happening is that many professionals in the SOCs, in those security operations centers, are finding that in order to keep up with all the evolving challenges, they need to learn more on the job. Sounds familiar? Well, sometimes they don't learn fast enough or even deep enough. And the broad amount of technology and attack surfaces is causing a deficit in knowledgeable security personnel. Now, half of the cybersecurity professionals do not believe they are prepared to respond to a cyber attack, with both lack of skills and training as the fault. Now, while the majority of respondents of a recent survey says 58% said that they most likely felt most comfortable with the level of their technical cyber defense skills. Now, the interesting part of the stat is that the professionals in the Enterprise Security Operations Center were least confident in two essential skill areas for detecting intruders. Number one, being network monitoring, and number two, intrusion detection, with 42% and 45% respectively. Now, considering those skills ready, according to the survey, of more than 100 cybersecurity professionals within 17 countries. Now, there's a great quote that is an analog to all of these scenarios, which is, with every sports team, if you don't train as a team, there's no way that they'll be able to be agile and work together at game time. Well, that definitely applies here, because cybersecurity professionals' training regimen in enterprise SOCs remains a problem, especially because the demand for cybersecurity professionals remains high. Now, in April, jobsboardindeed.com saw posting for technology and cybersecurity professionals drop actually 30%. However, these categories did better overall in the market during the pandemic, accounting for 11% greater share of the postings positions. Unfortunately, the industry has not done a good job here of building up programs to build the skills of SOC workers on the job. Training typically only improves skills needed to do the current work and does not add any new skills, especially those needed during attacks. Training has to change for sure. All right, let's bring in my co-host, because this is a big topic. I mean, obviously you guys work in security and you've done security for a long time. Curtis, is the case of just more training, maybe even just scenario-based training, and maybe add in a case study or two for analysis, really what's going to help professionals here? The reports seem to call out that organizations need to learn more on the job in the future in order to do better. Is the training going to really help, or is it need something else?
Well, I think that this notion of on-the-job training is one of the reasons that many companies look at things like capture the flag exercises and competitions as a solid way of seeing a candidate build their resume. When I talk to the companies and ask them, what kind of credentials do you want? Which magic string of letters behind someone's name really makes you want to hire them? The answer typically is none of them. What they really want to see is that someone has been active and understands security. These live games that capture the flags that are so popular at things like B-Sides and DEF CON and all of the other conferences that, if we struggle, we can remember having happened in the past. Those are critical because they show that someone actually understands what's going on and can apply it. The problem that the companies have is that even if they swept up everyone who participated in those competitions, the demand for skilled professionals is much higher than the talent pool of skilled professionals. And so the companies are left to do their own training. And as they would happily tell you, trying to train using these exercises that are typically run by a third party is awfully darned pricey. There just isn't a good, cheap way to solid cybersecurity talent.
Right. I agree. I think, Chee, I want to throw this to you because you've been in many knocks and socks before. And were the skilled professionals there, were they skilled because they just had good training?
Actually, the skilled professionals that I've worked with have almost always been
educated in the College of Hard Knocks. There's nothing quite like experience on actually doing things. But let me diverge just a little bit. I recently had a conversation with with one of my relatives' sons. And he had this idea that he could actually become a cybersecurity specialist simply by taking classes. And I said, no. Classwork is basically just a starting point. I told him you need to get involved. You need to go and do some exercises. Now, the reality is one thing, the message I try to tell anyone trying to get started is cybersecurity is not a field of study. It is not a subset of the IT world. It is a superset. I have run into all too many cybersecurity specialists, quote unquote, that don't even understand how things like VLANs work, or they don't understand other than the very smallest portion of how VPN works. They don't understand how different encryption methodologies work and which ones are better than others. I've actually run into some that they thought they had a nice secure network, and I said, well, I just rewrote your configuration on one of your switches by using your SNMP right community string that was still right. So my end of this rant is cybersecurity specialists need to be involved up to their elbows in all portions of the IT world. My big thing with my lab is I used to teach my students using the ISO 7-layer model as my syllabus. While I didn't want them to make a living at running cables, I wanted them to understand what it looks like, what it feels like, how it works, so that they know when they can recognize things like taps. They can recognize things like spans ports, all the other things that make up cybersecurity that is all too often ignored. Because the cybersecurity people, some of the cybersecurity people I've worked with in the past, this has been beneath them. So I think my advice to anyone is get your hands dirty, folks. It's all part of the learning process.
Indeed, it is indeed. Curtis, I want to throw this back to you because I think there's been some points here where it also means that a lot of cybersecurity professionals, they can learn on the job, they can learn in the school of hard knocks, but in the same sense, sometimes they need leaders. They need leaders to help drive them in the right direction, to focus on the different facets of cybersecurity. Especially each organization's different; they all have different setups and infrastructure, and so there needs some kind of direction sometimes. They might be able to do the work fairly quickly, but they need direction and need to be able to understand the focus areas. What do you think organizations should be doing here? Do they need to be also looking into hiring better leaders in this area?
Well, I think the better leaders are certainly something that companies want to have on board. And here they get into a fascinating question, and that is, for a great cybersecurity leader, do you necessarily look for a great cybersecurity researcher? And often the answer is no. Cybersecurity researchers can have some very, very specific talents, some very, very specific mindsets. And let's be honest, in some cases, I don't want to overgeneralize, but the qualities required to be a leader and the qualities required to be a great cybersecurity researcher have a fairly small slice in the middle of the Venn diagram where they overlap. Curiously, the cybersecurity leadership is one of those areas where I hear people say that some of the certifications are valuable. People, when they're looking at cybersecurity architects and managers and even CISOs, like to see things like CISSP on the tail end of someone's name on their resume. And that's because in order to get those certifications, you have to show that you understand how the security is going to be part of the business. That's really the key to leadership in cybersecurity. Understanding the business problems to be solved, understanding the business interests to be protected, and then giving guidance to your technical staff on how to do that. So, yes, I do think that companies need to hire and grow better cybersecurity leaders. They want to do that, but it is in many ways a completely different problem set than exists in finding or growing good cybersecurity pros.
Right. It's true. Well, hopefully the market will catch up. This is one of those things that we know the market continues to I would say to move into a specific trend. And I think the trend is that it's starting to learn how to train, and it's starting to learn how to coach, especially remote leaders. I think that's one of the biggest things I'm seeing is a lot of organizations are moving to this remote, and they know they're going to have to move and train more individuals to be leaders, even organically grow them up in their organizations. So they might have the security skills, but they don't necessarily have all the leadership skills, especially the remote leadership skills. So I think I'm starting to see that more with a lot of organizations out there, and hopefully that will help with this as well.